Hamas motorcycles and drones ambush an Israeli train. On August 13, 2025, in the tense southern corridor near Gaza, the desert night was shattered by one of the boldest Hamas strikes in recent memory. Out of the darkness, 80 explosive-laden suicide drones descended like a storm of steel hornets, each carrying a warhead of 20 pounds. Together, the swarm packed the punch of more than a ton of TNT, enough to mimic a tactical airstrike. At the same time, 30 motorcycles roared out of dirt tracks, each carrying 2 heavily armed fighters. 60 gunmen in total, wielding AK-74 rifles, RPG-7 launchers, and belt-fed machine guns, gunned their engines to nearly 55 miles per hour as they closed in on their target, a half-mile-long Israeli military train. Inside the 22 cars lay the lifeblood of an entire combat brigade: diesel fuel, ammunition, food supplies, and more than $50 million worth of precision-guided weapons. Hamas's mission was clear: cripple the rail artery, capture Israeli soldiers, and seize advanced weaponry on a scale that could fuel weeks of war. But Hamas had no idea. High above, 50 Israeli reconnaissance drones were already tracking their every move. On the ground, 5,000 elite troops with armored vehicles and military dogs were closing in. In orbit, satellites were mapping tunnels that would soon be reduced to rubble. Will Hamas hold on to its victory, or have they triggered their own destruction? Will Israel's hidden hand be revealed? Join me in discovering the truth. At 04:17 a.m. on August 13, 2025, the desert silence along Israel's southern rail corridor was ripped apart by one of the most audacious Hamas attacks in recent memory. A military train of 22 cars stretching nearly half a mile was rolling toward a fortified base. Inside, 320 tons of diesel, 120 tons of ammunition, 45 tons of rations, and precision weapons worth more than $50 million. Enough to fuel 4,000 soldiers for almost 3 weeks. The first wave came from the sky. 80 explosive drones dived in formation, each carrying a 9-kilogram charge. In seconds, the swarm delivered the force of 1.6 tons of TNT, the equivalent of a tactical airstrike. The opening strike slammed into the fuel cars. A wall of flame erupted, sending a fireball 300 feet high. Heat surged beyond 3,000 degrees, intense enough that satellites picked it up from orbit. Next came the escort section. 2 armored cars with 40 Israeli troops were shredded as drones punched through plating. Shrapnel, traveling over 3,200 kilometers per hour, ricocheted through compartments. Survivors staggered into smoke as more drones howled down. In under 120 seconds, order collapsed into chaos. Then the ground assault. From orchards and dirt tracks, 30 motorcycles charged, each with 2 Hamas fighters. 60 men armed with AK-74s, RPG-7 launchers, and belt-fed machine guns. Engines roared at nearly 88 kilometers per hour, closing fast. Their objective was brutal: storm the wreck, seize advanced weapons, drag soldiers away as hostages. In less than 5 minutes, the rail artery had become a war zone. Fuel cars burned like torches. Ammunition threatened to cook off. Explosions, engines, and gunfire merged into one storm. If you were Israel's top commander, would you have launched the attack, or would you have waited for them to return to base and destroyed the entire base? The inferno along the tracks was still raging when the first encrypted alerts reached Tel Aviv. 4 minutes after the ambush, Southern Command activated an emergency war council. Around the table, generals read numbers that cut like blades. A half-mile supply train crippled, 40 soldiers missing, and over $50 million in guided weapons at risk of capture. Hamas had struck with coordination unseen in years. If the response faltered, Israel's entire front line near Gaza could unravel. The assessment was cold and mathematical. Intelligence analysts warned that if even 20% of the munitions were retained, Hamas could stage weeks of ambushes, rocket barrages, and cross-border raids. Hundreds of Israeli casualties could follow. That outcome was unacceptable. The decision was made. Israel would not only recover what was lost, it would obliterate the infrastructure that enabled the attack. The first step was reconnaissance. 50 UAVs scrambled into the night, each equipped with ultra-high-resolution thermal cameras able to detect a human body from 24 kilometers away. Secure satellite relays linked their feeds into Tel Aviv. Within 11 minutes, analysts watched militants on motorcycles dragging crates of weapons toward tunnel entrances. 6 portals, clustered less than 800 yards from civilian neighborhoods, glowed on infrared screens. The battlefield had shifted, from the burning rails above ground to the shadow labyrinth below Gaza. With every second, the cost of hesitation grew. Hamas believed it had delivered a decisive blow. In reality, it had revealed its hiding places. The War Council drafted the next move, Operation Iron Hounds. The objective was uncompromising: hunt, strike, and dismantle Hamas's subterranean network before the stolen arsenal could vanish underground. Orders cascaded down encrypted channels. Drone swarms locked onto entrances. Satellite eyes mapped choke points, infantry brigades mobilized. A line had been crossed, and retaliation would be absolute. Support us by liking and subscribing. And now the Hamas army's lair is clearly visible. By 4:39 a.m., Israel's War Council had already escalated from reconnaissance to mobilization. One encrypted order, Iron Hounds Deploy, set in motion one of the largest rapid ground mobilizations in recent history. From fortified bases in the south, steel engines roared awake. 45 Namer armored personnel carriers rolled out, their turrets tracking the horizon. 18 Merkava 4 tanks followed, black silhouettes against the desert moonlight, each carrying a gun capable of firing depleted uranium shells at ranges exceeding 4 kilometers. Behind them came 12 heavily armed engineering vehicles, bristling with mine plows and demolition gear, designed to tear through obstacles and seal tunnels with fire and steel. Inside this column, 5,000 elite troops equal to an entire combat brigade. Every man carried night vision optics, AI-linked tablets, and biometric sensors keyed to detect hostages. The convoy's beating heart, however, was not human. 60 military working dogs, each worth nearly $50,000 after years of specialized training, trotted at the vanguard. Fitted with helmet-mounted 4K cameras, infrared lenses, and biometric trackers, they could slip through shafts narrower than 45 centimeters. Their uplinks streamed 10 gigabytes of data per minute, turning every twist of Hamas's tunnels into a live digital map. The strike force halted 6.2 miles from Gaza's frontier. Engines cut. Optics switched to green glow. Overhead, spy satellites locked onto suspected entrances. Analysts calculated the threat with precision. Hamas's underground empire stretched nearly 350 miles, 10 times the length of Manhattan. It could shelter 8,000 fighters, dozens of weapons depots, and command bunkers buried 90 feet down. Iranian-supplied rockets, thousands of rifles, and hundreds of RPG launchers stocked the chambers. Yet the Israeli column was methodical, armed with seismic sensors, fiber optic scopes, and AI mapping software. Every tremor, every whisper underground would become a coordinate for destruction. The battlefield was no longer desert or rail. It was the earth itself, and Israel was preparing to split it open. Don't leave yet. This is the destruction of the Hamas army. The silence ended at 05:11 a.m. when the strike order was given. For half an hour, 5,000 Israeli soldiers had waited in the dark, nerves strung tight as bowstrings. Now the battlefield erupted in sudden fury. Phase 1, the opening barrage. Dozens of shoulder-fired launchers barked in unison. In less than 10 seconds, over 300 high-explosive grenades tore arcs into Hamas positions clustered around tunnel mouths. The blast ripped open bunkers and collapsed sandbag barricades, scattering militants who had no idea how closely they were being watched. Shockwaves rolled through the ground, announcing that the war had shifted below. Phase 2, the loitering storm. Above the field, 350 loitering munitions circled like metallic vultures. Each drone, no larger than a backpack, carried a 4.5-kilogram warhead. Their nose-mounted cameras streamed real-time imagery into AI-guided targeting systems. Operators selected with surgical precision. One UAV plunged into a machine gun nest, detonating with the force of 5 grenades. Another veered into a cluster of RPG teams trying to regroup. In under 3 minutes, more than 60 Hamas fighters were eliminated. Panic spread as militants realized they were not fighting men, but machines that saw everything. Phase 3. Underground assault. The deadliest blow struck where Hamas felt invincible. 50 bunker-buster drones, each equipped with shaped charges, dived into shafts and ventilation holes. Their copper-lined cones detonated, creating plasma jets traveling 9,144 meters per second, hot enough to pierce nearly 1 meter of reinforced concrete. Deep below, the main Hamas command chamber, buried at a depth of 27 meters, was engulfed. Radios, servers, laptops, and the commanders themselves vaporized in fire. The nerve center was gone in seconds. Technology as a weapon. Battlefield AI integrated seismic sensors with acoustic trackers. Every footstep underground, every scrape of metal echoed upward. Within seconds, drones recalibrated mid-flight, redirecting their warheads toward the source. Hamas fighters who thought they could maneuver unseen found themselves targeted by machines that literally heard them move. The secondary explosions. Precision strikes turned storage into inferno. One cavernous fuel depot erupted, nearly 20,000 gallons of diesel igniting at once. The blast registered a 2.1 on the Richter scale, shaking the ground like an earthquake. Further along, a munitions cache holding 200 RPG warheads and 15,000 rounds went up. Secondary detonations rippled for over 7 minutes, thunder rolling through the tunnels like artillery from the underworld. Psychological collapse. Above ground, chaos reigned. Surviving militants fired wildly into the smoke, their gunfire desperate and blind. Every muzzle flash was tracked. Within 6 seconds, an Israeli UAV adjusted course and struck. It became man against algorithm, panic against calculation. By the time 45 minutes had passed, the network Hamas had carved out over 15 years was crumbling. Walls cracked, fuel burned, ammunition cooked off, command links fell silent. What had once been a fortress was becoming a tomb. It was a trap that had just been turned inside out. By 6:02 a.m., the underground fortress was a graveyard of fire and shattered steel. Yet the assault was not over. As the last UAV detonations faded, 5,000 Israeli soldiers advanced, storming the labyrinth with methodical precision. The ground phase unfolded like clockwork. Squads moved chamber by chamber, fiber optic scopes guiding them through smoke-filled corridors. In 90 minutes of brutal close-quarters combat, more than 1,000 Hamas fighters were confirmed killed. Another 500, stunned by shock waves and blinded by dust, surrendered with rifles still slung across their backs. The rest fled into blind tunnels, only to be cornered and captured. The payoff was staggering. Dozens of Israeli hostages seized during the train ambush were pulled alive from makeshift prison cells deep underground. Crates of stolen weapons, over $50 million in rifles, rockets, and ammunition, were recovered intact. 6 entire tunnel branches, nearly 12 miles in length, were packed with explosives and collapsed, erasing years of construction in thunderous detonations. For Hamas, the cost was catastrophic. Their central command hub was annihilated, hundreds of seasoned fighters gone, their prized underground citadel reduced to rubble. For Israel, it was more than recovery. It was a message delivered in fire and steel. No ambush, no fortress, and no weapon could outlast Israel's reach. By the time the sun climbed fully over Gaza, the battlefield told a story no press release could soften. What began as a disaster had been flipped into decisive victory. In less than 2 hours, Israel transformed a burning supply train into the spark that annihilated one of Hamas's strongest bastions. 5,000 soldiers stormed the tunnels. More than 1,500 militants were killed or captured. Dozens of hostages, dragged underground hours earlier, were pulled back alive. Crates of rifles, rockets, and guided munitions worth over $50 million were restored to Israeli hands. The rail ambush that Hamas believed would cripple an army instead became bait for their own destruction. The infrastructure losses were staggering. 12 miles of tunnels collapsed, buried under tons of explosives. 20,000 gallons of fuel ignited in subterranean firestorms. A base 15 years in the making was erased in just 45 minutes. Years of smuggling, digging, and training obliterated in less than a morning. The psychological blow was even greater. Hamas gambled that surprise and chaos could outrun Israeli discipline and technology. Instead, drones, satellites, seismic sensors, and AI-guided firepower created a battlefield where failure was mathematically impossible. Every move was tracked, every bunker penetrated, every shot answered within seconds. For Hamas, the outcome was humiliation. For Israel, it was not merely recovery, but a declaration etched in smoke and steel. Ambushes can be planned, tunnels can be dug, weapons can be smuggled, but in the end, Israel will find, strike, and destroy always.